What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I want to try something new here on Comics Explained. For the most part, when it comes to character discussions, we do like these great big huge elaborate discussions on things, but the most popular characters and pretty much all the characters that we're going to discuss over the course of these videos have already been talked about. I mean, we've already done those big character discussions, so there's no sense in going back and doing them again. I want these to be a series of videos that serve no other purpose than to get you prepared for Marvel Legacy, so you can go and immediately start reading the comics and know exactly what to expect, or at the very least, have a perfect understanding or a near perfect understanding of what's going on in the stories and what's coming down the pipeline. So in this video, we're going to focus on Iron Man. Now, this all really goes back to 2013 when a guy named Kieran Gillen took over the Iron Man stories. What Kieran Gillen did is he basically introduced a couple of different things, but the biggest thing that we need to worry about is a character named Arno Stark. What happened is Kieran Gillen crafted this great big huge epic called the Secret Origin of Tony Stark, and it introduced this idea that Tony himself was not actually the biological child of Howard and Maria. Instead, he was adopted. The biological child of Howard and Maria was a guy named Arno Stark, and Arno Stark was basically this super smart guy and different things like that, but he was kept hidden just because of the fact that there was some things that Howard and Maria did that they didn't want anybody else to know, and they were basically just keeping Arno hidden away from the rest of the world. The specifics as to why that is are both covered in this video, and they'll also be covered once Arno actually comes out in the comics. The long and short of it was that Arno was basically genetically engineered, and the person who genetically engineered him could not know that Howard and Maria made adjustments to the genes of Arno himself, and that's really about it. But Arno just remained hidden for decades. He was literally just sitting in this hospital, more or less, that had been established in the name of Howard and Maria, and nobody ever knew about him. Tony didn't even know about him. And so because of this, Arno basically had like a pretty cool role to play. He was more of like a background character for the Iron Man stories in the sense that he helped Tony Stark with a wide array of different things, the extremis tech, for example, the technology that allows Iron Man to merge directly with his own suit, and then also has a lot of other practical purposes. But Arno vanished during the events of All New All Different Marvel. He's not been seen or heard from since, and we have no idea what happened to him, but we know he will be explored as part of Marvel Legacy, so that's the reason why I bring him up. Another thing, and this is what hits home at the idea of Matt Fraction's run back in 2008, this is something called Stark Resilient. Stark Resilient was a concept created by Tony Stark for the purposes of being a branch off from his own Stark Industries. Stark Industries focuses on weapons manufacturing. Stark Resilient focuses on things like technology for society, better phones and devices and all different manner of things. The idea was that Pepper Potts, who had long since been the assistant of Tony Stark, was elevated to CEO of Stark Resilient. Now, this was done just because of the fact that her being associated with Tony as part of Stark Industries made her a target for a lot of villains, and so ultimately Tony put her in charge of Stark Resilient. What this did is this ran all the way through the Secret Origin of Tony Stark, the introduction of Arno, and into something called Superior Iron Man. Now, Superior Iron Man was this story where it basically came as an aftermath to Axis. Axis was a story that dealt with the idea that the Red Skull had gotten the brain of Charles Xavier, who'd been killed by Cyclops, and basically just like went on a rampage. It took like Doctor Strange and the Scarlet Witch to use magic to try to invert Red Skull, make him a good guy. The spell infected everybody, so all the good guys became bad guys, all the bad guys became good guys. When everything was supposed to go back to normal, Tony Stark shielded himself. And so what ended up happening is that when the Kieran Gillen run of Iron Man ended, it ended before Secret Wars 2015 started. And so Marvel would have had like 9 months of no stories involving Iron Man. And so what they did is they went to a guy named Tom Taylor and just said, give us an Iron Man story. We don't care what it is. It's gotta be tied into Axis somehow, or it has to be an aftermath to Axis because that's the big event that he was just involved in. Give us something. And so Tom Taylor had basically written a story called Superior Iron Man, where it detailed the events that Tony Stark went through after shielding himself and basically remaining a bad guy. So he went full blown back into alcoholism. He was a total jerk to basically everybody. He alienated Pepper Potts. She didn't want to have anything to do with him. And then the story just ended because Secret Wars 2015 happened. So we got no real resolution to it. I mean, we did in the sense that the version of Iron Man that fights Captain America when the multiverse is coming to an end, that's basically Superior Iron Man. But going into All New, All Different Marvel, Tony Stark was back to his normal self with no real explanation as to why. But there were some things that lingered over. For example, Pepper Potts still wanted nothing to do do with Iron Man whatsoever. And because Pepper Potts didn't want to have anything to do with him, what ended up happening is writer Brian Michael Bendis reached out and grabbed Mary Jane Watson from the Spider-Man comics and rolled her over into the Iron Man comics. Mary Jane Watson basically became the new Pepper Potts. She was the assistant behind the scenes, helping to run the company and different things like that, while Tony Stark was off doing his own thing. At the same time, while we had the Invincible Iron Man stories, we also had a story called International Iron Man. And International Iron Man basically was a 7-issue miniseries that did nothing more than detail Tony Stark's search for his biological parents. And he found his mom. And that's it. That's the only thing you need to worry about. He found his mom came back, she hangs out at Stark Industries, and that's it. There's really nothing else going on there. Now, following the first 6 or 7 issues of Invincible Iron Man, what ended up happening is Marvel launched a story called Civil War II. And Civil War II was designed to do nothing more than just capitalize on the popularity of the Civil War movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The problem was that the story was fleshed out over the course of 3 months. For those of you guys who are new to Marvel Comics, usually when a company sits down, Marvel, DC, whoever, when they sit down and they say, okay, we want to do a great big huge grandiose event, whether it's the original Civil War from back in 2005, 2006, whether it is the House of M when all the mutants lose their powers, whatever the case may be, they usually sit down like 1 or 2 years in advance and like flesh the whole thing out, what all the tie-ins are going to be, all that kind of good stuff. Civil War II did not receive that treatment. The movie was made, everything was fleshed out over 3 months, and then all the stories were just thrown in and that was it. And so because of that, it was not really well received because it felt rushed. But the overall gist of Civil War II was that there was an Inhuman named Ulysses who claimed he could see the future. And in some instances he was right, in some instances he was wrong. But what it did is it split the community down the middle. On one half, you had Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, who believed they should just take his visions at face value and assume they're absolutely true. On the other side, you had Tony Stark, who said, no, we should at least check to see whether or not he's absolutely right 100% of the time before we just assume that he's right 100% of the time. And so ultimately, at the end of Civil War II, Tony Stark died. And so his body was just sort of thrown in stasis. And that was really about it. He was just kind of tossed in this system where he was just kind of kept on ice until such a time as he could be revived, or until writer Brian Michael Bendis wanted to bring him back. And so in place of Tony Stark dying, we got 2 new versions of Iron Man. The first is the one that everybody complains about, and the second is the one that nobody complains about. So the first one that people always complain about is Riri Williams, in the sense that she's basically a girl who was able to duplicate Tony Stark's armor. And Brian Michael Bendis used this as a means to grab the character and then roll her over into being the new Iron Man. Now, the part that people complain about is the idea that, well, it's a diversity push for the sake of diversity, and well, they did it too fast. Tim Drake became Robin in 6 issues in DC Comics, so I don't understand that complaint. But the idea here is that Riri Williams basically became the new Iron Man. And so Tony Stark just kind of remained on ice. He had backed up his mind to an artificial intelligence, and he was the AI inside her suit. So he would basically train her, guide her, teach her how to be a superhero, different things like that. The other version of Iron Man was Dr. Doom, and that version was covered in a story called Infamous Iron Man. And that basically just detailed the idea that after the events of Secret Wars 2015, when Dr. Doom had essentially become God and then lost his powers after being defeated by Reed Richards, that he had gone on this quest of a redemption of sorts. And so he was basically acting as Iron Man with a really, really cool looking outfit, and then just either being a superhero or interacting with other characters. But it was really more of like a personal quest, the return of Dr. Doom's mom, different things like that. It's really some of the best storytelling involving his character that I've seen since the events of like Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and like Books of Doom that focus on his origin and then of course the events of Secret Wars respectively. But the idea here is that as part of Marvel Legacy, there are a handful of things that are going to happen. Having said all that, the first is that Arno Stark will be revisited. That's something that Brian Michael Bendis, the writer of Iron Man, has stated, that Arno Stark will be revisited again. Eventually he'll come back and we'll find out what's been going on with him all this time. The second is that Tony Stark has returned, but we don't know how, and we don't know where he is. The new story arc for part of Marvel Legacy is the search for Tony Stark. So essentially what had happened in the Marvel Legacy one-shot is that somebody had gone in, they'd gone to check on the case of Tony Stark where his body was being held, and he just vanished, and nobody knew where he went to. And so that's the new story, is to see what in the world happened to him, where he's gone, and then eventually he'll probably go back to being Iron Man again. The other thing is that we will also see a little more expansion when it comes to the character of Tony Stark's mom. We'll see a few more things expanded on that. The thing to keep in mind though is that in some of the books, Marvel's going bi-weekly, which means they're releasing them every 2 weeks. I think Iron Man is one of them because he's just so popular. I know the Avengers is one of them, and there may be a few others. So usually because of the fact that these story arcs last anywhere between 5 to 6 issues, we'll basically end up seeing this whole thing resolved at the latest latest in 6 months, at the earliest in 3 months. But we've just got a whole bunch of dead space between the time that this issue number 1 comes out and the time it resolves. We've got a lot of time. But the fact remains here, that's essentially the long and short of what's going on right now. That essentially Tony Stark is back, Riri Williams is still Iron Man, Dr. Doom is still infamous Iron Man. He'll play a role in the ongoing Invincible Iron Man story. We will see the brother of Tony Stark come back. We may end up seeing Pepper Potts realign herself with Tony Stark. We don't know. Those are the kind of things that we're just kind of waiting to see, or that we know what will happen. But anyway, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained and you guys enjoy these kind of videos, let me know. Leave a comment down below or drop a like or something like that. And if you are new here and you dig stuff like this, then make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. And yeah, this is actually kind of fun. I like doing this. This is pretty interesting. Just a quick, no frills explanation on what's been happening over the course of the last few years of Marvel Comics when it comes to the launch of Marvel Legacy. So anyway, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.